Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I hear our competitor, renewable energy, not really a competitor, but it has a full house, and energy efficiency. We're still struggling. I need to start thinking about how to make these titles a bit more sexy and interesting. So that's something I'll change next year, so we can gather a bigger crowd. So dear speakers, colleagues, and participants, it's a real pleasure to welcome you today to our fourth and unfortunately our final session for the energy efficiency thematic track. My name is David Morgado. I'm Senior Energy Specialist in the Asian Development Bank, and I'm your co-chair for this energy efficiency thematic track, together with Mel Slade, who was in the session earlier. So she's Senior Program Manager, Energy Efficiency and Emerging Economies Program for the International Energy Agency, and it's a real pleasure to have her here with us. The aim of this session is to bring to attention that energy efficiency is, of course, cross-sectoral, and to double progress of energy efficiency by 2030, which is the target for COP28. We need to ensure energy efficiency measures are adopted in transport and cities, agriculture, water, fisheries, and many other sectors. We have total of 1 hour and a half, and we have the first 1 hour, we have a series of amazing presentations for you, and we will have time, I can assure you, time for a panel discussion and Q&A for the audience for 30 minutes after. I kindly ask all the speakers to keep to the 8 minutes so that we have enough time for the questions. So with this context and background, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this session, to set really the scene on energy efficiency and transport in Asia. Alvin Mejia is a program manager for the Asian Transport Outlook, and he'll be highlighting the current trends and opportunities for an energy efficient transport sector in the region. Thank you, Alvin. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, David. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alvin Mejia, and I work as a program manager for the Asian Transport Outlook, which is essentially an initiative that is being funded and supported by the Asian Development Bank as well as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We are a project that is aiming to pursue the strengthening of the knowledge base of transportation in Asia Pacific. So you can go to the website, have a look at the data, the policy. We have data for 51 economies, 460 cities. We have information on policies, as well as projects on transportation. So if you're looking for anything that's related to transportation in the region, please have a look at our website. We are currently in the third phase of the project. We have been running for 5 years now, and hopefully within the next few years, we would strengthen the Asian Transport Outlook products and as well as the portal. So with the data and the information that we are collecting, we are having specific insights in terms of the transportation sector, the multidimensional aspects of it. And what I wanted to let's say, pursue right now is to provide you some thought-provoking insights in terms of energy efficiency in the transport sector in the region, which may not be too gloomy as we may initially think, because what we are seeing over the long term, within the last couple of decades, we have been seeing that the region as a whole has been achieving lower energy intensities for the transportation sector as we move forward in terms of economic development. So we are seeing more, let's say, efficiencies as compared to our counterparts in sub-Saharan Africa, but we are also much more getting more efficient in terms of our transportation sector, even if we look into comparing ourselves with the more developed regions globally. And this is not just, the averages are not just being pulled by, let's say a couple of economies in the region, but we are seeing this trend across. So the graph that you see here, it's really an evolution of the distribution of the countries over time. So what we are seeing is that up to 2020, more than half of the economies in the region have moved towards the more efficient spectrum. And this could be meaning in terms of the recent developments and the recent gains that the transportation sector is having as compared to the other sectors as well. So this graph here compares just the periods between 2015 before and after because of the SDGs as well. But what we are seeing is that the transportation sector has been exhibiting significant gains in terms of energy improvements as opposed to other sectors such as agriculture, commercial, residential, and manufacturing. And there could be a lot of different factors that are playing its role in terms of us achieving these sorts of improvements in the sector. But maybe one piece of information that we could look at is maybe motorization, the way developing Asia is motorizing. Back in the early 2000s, there were several of these pieces of work that are picturing the Asia-Pacific region as a whole, moving towards car-centric, very car-centric motorization pathways similar to the US, for example. But what we have been seeing in the last 2 decades is that a lot of the developing Asian countries, aside from the ones that you see here more on the left side, we are motorizing more on the smaller vehicles, so the 2 and 3 wheelers, rather than intensifying more on the cars and the LDVs. This is just one factor, may provide us some insights of why we are having more efficient intensities in terms of energy consumption in the sector. Another one is that a lot of our cities, we are heavily dependent, number one, on public transport modes, as well as intermediate public transport modes, which may not necessarily be ideal in terms of service quality, in terms of providing sufficient access to the residents, but nonetheless, a lot of the metropolitan cities and urban agglomerations in the region are very much serviced by public transport modes. So for example, Metro Manila, Jakarta, you would see like 60% of the total trips that are being served by public transport modes. A lot of them are also being serviced by your intermediate public transport vehicles, which are the smaller ones, and everything else it's heavily more on the smaller vehicles as well. We have been motorizing, or we have been developing a lot of these rapid transport infrastructure in the recent past as well. But we have a long way to go in terms of catching up when we look at metrics such as rapid urban transit per capita. So these are your metros, your light rail transit systems, as well as your BRTs. It's also good to note that Asia has been at the forefront of the transition to electric mobility. What we're seeing is that a lot of the 60% of the electric cars that have been added from 2015 to 2023, and 90% of the e-buses, the additional e-buses, have been added in Asia. And we also know that around 90 to 95% of the global electric 2 and 3 wheeler stock is in the region. So what is happening now is that also on the technological side of things, we are going towards that transition. But the thing is, we have also been looking into policy documents for electrification. And what we are seeing right now is that we need a better balance in terms of where we're going, where we're headed, because a lot of the policy measures right now focus on the electrification of the fleet, particularly the car fleet. So we cannot really just simply electrify congestion in the future. So we need to have a balance here in terms of the electric mobility policies. But on a wider note, what we have been seeing in the past, this is a collection of more than 1,100 policy documents. Essentially, what we're seeing is that more and more policies and targets, multidimensional ones, are being adopted within the various countries in the region, which also gives us a better picture in terms of where we're headed in the future. But just to put everything into context, while we are seeing improvements overall in terms of the energy efficiencies, these such improvements do not necessarily translate, in terms of overall provision of access, as well as provision of high quality services in terms of transportation. In terms of urban access, it's still a 1.4 billion problem right now. What we're estimating that 1.4 billion people in Asia do not have adequate access to urban public transport services, so as defined in the SDGs. So there's a lot of room to grow, a lot of things to be done. But what we are seeing is that as a whole, we are achieving these better levels in terms of energy efficiencies. And there are a lot of different factors that play their role in terms of such trends. But ultimately, we have to be cognizant in terms of putting energy efficiency goals as well in terms of the wider goals for the transportation sector as a whole. So with that, I leave you with our contact details. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvin, for setting the context and also for all the good work the Asian Transport Outlook is doing. Of course, having access to data and being able to look at this and use it for decision making, to help for policies to understand where we need to go and how we can help, whether it's cities or governments move forward. We still have a lot to do. We'll have more time in the panel to distill some of the numbers that were presented. And I'll now move to our second presenter, Won Myung-hung, Senior Investment Specialist from ADB. He and his colleagues have been super busy working on a wide range of amazing private sector projects here at ADB, and he'll highlight some of the again, the great work ADB is doing on e-mobility and sustainable transport in Southeast Asia. So it's a pleasure to have him here. Wong, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So my name is Won Myung-hong, just call me Won for short. So I'm the unit head for the private sector infrastructure investment covering the Greater Mekong region based out of Bangkok. So the coverage includes Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. And our team covers various sectors in the infrastructure space. So it ranges from renewables, electric mobility, water, transport, IT infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So today, I just wanted to make a brief introduction of the ADB's journey in promoting electric mobility, sustainable transport, as we call it, in the region. So just a brief context. So I mean, as we all know, I mean, transport contributes significantly to GHG emissions, and it has been growing over the last 3 decades. And it is paramount that we tackle this issue head on. And in addition to greenhouse gas emissions, the fuel combustion coming from the transport sector emits a lot of particulate matters, and it's a big issue for air pollution in the big cities in the region. And increasingly, there is a lot of interest from the private sector to do more in this sector, and in various modes of transportation, like electric buses, manufacturing of electric vehicles, and the components in the whole supply chain. Encouragingly, there has been increasing adoption of e-mobility in the region. So the good example will be Thailand. In recent months, 1 in 5 new cars sold in Thailand are electric vehicles, which is astonishing compared to just 2 years ago when it's in the single digit in terms of percentage. But of course, throughout the region, it's still at a very, very nascent stage. In Philippines, for example, I think it's less than 1% at this point. So there's more room to go. And so based on this backdrop, we at the private sector team thinks that this is a key sector that we want to focus. And we have been spending a lot of efforts in trying to promote this sector through our investments in the past few years. So, I mean, our approach to the sector is that first we need to make sure that we have sufficient resources to really build the sector up. So it can't be just a business as usual type of activity. So we have a dedicated resources to really build up the pipeline, identify the players, and really work with them to design a project that is bankable and financeable from our side. And these are new sectors and new technologies. So there's always first mover risk, ridership risk, and various risks that we need to tackle. And one of the critical ways for us to do so is through providing innovative financing structures, including concessional finance. So back about 4 years ago, we secured concessional financing of $30 million specifically for sustainable transport. And we have successfully deployed all of this funding for projects for the last few years. And we're in the process of trying to secure additional resources to promote this further. And of course, ADB has a lot of in-house expertise and technical assistance support that we can use towards doing market studies, due diligence, technical assessment, and things like that. So we brought all those efforts to bear in promoting the financing in the sector in our projects. So this is just a slide to summarize the activities that we have done and the financings that we were able to close over the last few years in the e-mobility sector. So we mobilized close to $700 million of private sector financing and in this space, which includes ADB's own financing, of course, parallel loans from our co-financing partners, as well as concessional financing, as I mentioned before. So just to walk you through the journey. So we first started with supporting the two MRT, mass rapid transit lines in Bangkok. That's called Pink and Yellow lines. And after that, we did the green loan for electric vehicle charging network in Thailand. And right after the COVID, we financed 27 electric ferries that's running along the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok. So it's the first commercial electric vehicle deployment in the region, to our understanding. And also we went to Vietnam. We did e-bus deployment as well as manufacturing financing. We supported EV charger production facilities here in the Philippines. And also last year we supported deployment of electric buses as well as electric tuk-tuks or three-wheelers. So we'll see a lot of those public transportation modes running around in Bangkok if you go and visit them. So, and through all this support, that's our impact on the right, top right. So 1,300 buses, MRT lines, 27 e-ferries, thousands of charging stations, and 1,500 electric tuk-tuks. So there is lots to do, and as Alvin mentioned, but we are proud of the journey we have taken so far and hope to do more in the future. So with that, I will, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Juan. And of course, if you're interested in some of the projects, there's more information online, and Juan is here as well, so you can ask him. And of course, we'll have the panel discussion. But again, as he mentioned, there's a lot to do, but it's just a glimpse of what ADB can do. And I think we've covered a lot of range of the e-mobility. We've covered boats, tuk-tuks, three-wheelers, e-buses as well. So that's great. And we will have one of the companies we've worked with in the closing plenary tomorrow to tell us what are their plans for the future. With that, our third presenter is Nidhi Gupta, Associate Director for Environmental Design Solutions. She will now bring a perspective from cities and how they can become energy efficiency champions. So we need more champions. And she has specific examples from cities in India. Nidhi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. So just to give you a, just to give you a background, this project is part of, it was funded or supported by C40, and a lot of cities are looking at the Race to Zero campaign, and so this kind of emerged from that kind of a thing that, okay, in cities are looking at Race to Zero, how do they get there? Are there sectoral plans that can be drawn up, roadmaps with their commitments in line? So this work was focused, it's a year-long process, and it was focused on the energy and the building sector specifically. And a little bit about where it is focused. It's in Maharashtra. So it's one of the states within India, and it's the second most populated state. It is with 45% of its population residing in the urban area. And also, I mean, when we look at this, we also need to see how do you kind of translate this into a per capita, emissions across even in the world or even in the States. So a world average per capita emissions we started was, India is India is like 1/3 of what it is or half of what it is. And the Maharashtra state is above the national average, though it is definitely less than many of the developed or other countries as well. A majority of the cities, so we broke down, there were 43 cities which are part of this whole data collection process, and we broke down the emissions in terms of GHG emissions from buildings per capita, as well as looking at the overall GHG emissions. Now, mind you, this is only the electricity sector, not transportation per se, but coming from electricity and some amount of cooking, because cooking is again an important when you're looking at the building sector. And we do see that most of them have, if I look at any resident living there, is living a 1-ton carbon lifestyle, right? And some of the cities where we see the emissions have been high, they are going to maybe 1.5. So it's not really as much as maybe a Western world. We broke this down by end users. And this is something which you will see across. It is not only applicable to India, but otherwise also. So you see the yellow line, that's residential. And most of the cities we saw that the residential end use consumption is high. Certain cities which have industrial related sector growth, there was an industrial footprint which is in black, is going high. So first of all, understanding where the cities are, what their priorities are, where the roadmap needs to focus on was one of the first things that we undertook across these 43 cities. And you mind you that these are across 3 climatic zones in India. So, I mean, that factor also starts coming into play when we're designing this. Across all cities, like I said, 60 to 80% is residential. So if a roadmap needs to be played or marked, that is one sector that we definitely need to, and it's a very hard to abate sector as well, because end consumers and people, you and me, start coming into play when we are looking at this. That's just a bit of a journey, starting from, I'll not get into these details, but the steps to the roadmap development, because I think this is something which will be applicable across, right? And the first one was looking at an extensive stakeholder mapping and a landscape analysis. And that's, I mean, in India, we have tiers, national, state, commitments across, baseline development, identification of actions, prioritization of these actions, and eventually looking at the development of the roadmap. What we were able to do was, for 43 cities, put up a baseline. So where do the cities are? Where are they? What is my starting point? If I have to say I'm moving to net zero, I need to know where I am right now. And that was something that was done for them at the first cut. Then looking at what can be the actions, and we broke that into 3 tracks. One was decarbonizing the building sector, looking at decarbonizing the energy supply, and then management and institutional, because that is an important aspect as well. So there were certain actions. I'll go into these a little bit later. Again, on energy supply, how do you look at that? And most importantly, who manages? How does it manage? And do we have benchmarking? How do you even look at monitoring verification of these systems year on? So we mapped this and we developed a scenario. Like, okay, if this is for one city, and we did this for 7 cities just to take up, okay, how are our roadmaps, are our actions really working the way we want them to work? And so if I look at a 2050 scenario, you directly see that there is a jump of 3 times, in terms of the growth of the electricity emissions. If I look at retrofitting of existing buildings, you can do this much. If I look at energy code compliance, you can do this much. If I look at efficient cooking stoves, this is what I can do. If I look at street lighting, decarbonizing the building construction related work, this is what I can do. Clean fuel for cooking, distributed renewable energy, supplying clean electricity, and looking at other renewable or carbon sequestration. So this was like, okay, these are the impacts of the actions, and this gives the first step for any city to start taking up decisions on which actions, where to prioritize, where is my control like, and obviously transition to clean. So we identified the top actions, and it was very clear that renewable energy or clean electricity supply, definitely, right? No brainer. But new codes is important again. Distributed renewable energies is important again. So not looking at just cleaning the supply, but at the demand side, can I integrate renewable energy within my buildings along with energy efficiency to look at that? Existing building footprint and low embodied construction, because that materials play an important role as well. We looked at co-benefits across well-being, environment, economic prosperity to see where these actions lie and how they play. And this is just to give you a 2030 strategic impact kind of a scenario, right? So retrofits, building codes, some things on grid interactive related work, and then on the energy supply, the track 2. And you see that 42% emissions could be reduced just looking at buildings itself. And the next could be looked at cleaning the energy supply. That's another 50. So buildings definitely within the footprint played an important role. And you do see everywhere the residential sector, how much it is. So this was just an example of one. We did this for 7 other odd cities, developed this decarbonization roadmap with specific actions, specific checkpoints on a 5-year target. So what needs to be set in the first year, second year, how do you build that up? And what should be the target for that year for these specific sectors? You can see emissions per capita of the city when it starts, and when it moves down, what targets were set, reduction targets were set, strategies against each actions were set, as well as prioritize actions, which you see in highlighted for that specific city based on their specific sectoral growth. In the first 2 years till 2025, we focused a lot on preparation. What needs to be set in place in terms of systems that need to be set in place, implementation frameworks that need to be set in place, that the city needs to decide whose jurisdiction is what. And then strategy implementation along with monitoring in these checks. So yes, there's a summary of this document available, and maybe that's something that you all can connect on. This is only part of the work, but yeah, considering the time frame we have, that's what I can do now. I'm happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Nidhi. You gave a glimpse of all the work you have done and the team have done over the years. And I guess it's for seven cities you've done so far, but detailed one. Can replicate. And the nice thing is that in the beginning we were seeing all the data and comparing those different cities as well. Then you can get them into competition as well against each other in terms of clean energy transition and energy efficiency. Our fourth presenter is Craig Menzies. He's head of Energy Department, Global Factor International Consulting, and he will share their approach on engaging with local governments to set an energy efficiency measures and targets and combine these with climate and disaster resilience measures. So it's a really nice segue from Nidhi's presentation. Craig, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Very nice to be here. My name is Craig Menzies. Thanks for the introduction. I work in a company called Global Factor. We're a consulting firm. We're advising mainly public sector clients, governments, ministries of energy, ministries of environment, on all sorts of things related to sustainability, climate change mitigation, adaptation, and the energy transition. You're perhaps wondering if I've wandered into the wrong room. I'm about to start talking about disaster resilience and boosting resilience in cities, and what on earth has that got to do with energy efficiency? But I mean, it's pretty. There's a pretty clear link, and actually, it's maybe not so surprising. Yeah, sometimes when we talk about energy efficiency and developing strategies, action plans, and so on, it can feel very technical, and it has to be. But if we want to really get through to communities, governments, to really make progress in terms of boosting disaster resilience and energy efficiency and the low carbon transition, it can be a helpful way to get through to them is through speaking in terms of disaster resilience. Communities think about the impacts of climate change. They're clearly very worried about it, in certain places, extremely worried, of course. And these impacts are going to be evolving and getting harder to deal with over time. So energy efficiency has a lot of links with disaster resilience. And yeah, I mean, some of them are obviously very clear. We know them already. Things like if you have efficient buildings, you also have the co-benefit that those buildings can stand up to extreme weather events. If you have smart grids and so on, they require less energy in the first place. So if you have a major disaster event, then the overall low energy demand is actually lower, so it's slightly easier to rebuild and so on, and it's obviously cost effective as well. I'm going to tell a quick story about a project we did in North Sulawesi province in Indonesia. This is briefly showing on the map there. It's that tip at the very top there that is jutting out into the sea. It's an energy island, effectively. It's very challenging terrain, and it's also faced with a lot of challenging weather events. No, but North Sulawesi province has a growing population, has an absolutely booming economy. But on the other side, and I don't want to be too negative, it's also on an unsustainable development track at the moment. It's very vulnerable to natural disasters. It has very little incentive for energy efficiency. It has subsidized energy. Coal is very dominant, as it is in lots of parts of Indonesia. Very significant energy demand projected growth. And it has no overarching energy efficiency framework beyond the one that's set at the national level. No targets, as I mentioned as well. It's effectively an energy island. No? So it's very limited possibility to import energy. It's quite vulnerable. Okay, so planning for carbon neutrality, we need to think about at least two things. Firstly, the fact that planning, public policy needs to be set by science-led guidance. Also, it needs to ensure a deep outreach into society. In this project that I'm about to mention, which was funded by APEC, we undertook a few things, basically around a multi-stakeholder dialogue. But before the multi-stakeholder dialogue, we did a bit of preparation. We did a training the trainer session to give some training to planning officers around what is multi-stakeholder dialogue, what is disaster resilience, energy efficiency planning, that kind of thing. And we also did some background energy scenario modeling and the development of draft energy efficiency targets. The multi-stakeholder dialogue itself took place in February of this year. We were supporting with that as a consulting firm, but really the focal point was the North Sulawesi government. And in that multi-stakeholder dialogue, we developed a vision for carbon neutrality, for disaster resilience, for low carbon development in general, and also together over 6 days set 2030 targets for renewables, for energy efficiency, and for carbon neutrality. You can see there the 5 major topics that we went over, or the approach within the MSD itself, so thematic presentations by international experts on a host of topics, moderated discussions, presentation of draft targets, discussion about the methodology. Then we had lots of discussions about the actual proposals, the vision itself, debating how that would work for North Sulawesi province, adjusting things in real time and so on. And then finally, a final voting session to endorse the vision and the targets. The main things that we discussed within the MSD itself, well, a lot of discussion about what we thought would happen within North Sulawesi province in terms of energy and the energy transition to 2030, 2050 and beyond. That was an extremely useful exercise because, amongst other things, we saw very clearly the things that we don't have information about, that the government is struggling to get information about in terms of data access to information and so on, where it should potentially be prioritizing efforts to be able to, develop scenarios for energy transition and to monitor things as it moves forward. We also had a lot of discussions about the challenges and the opportunities, particularly related to natural disasters. And yeah, some conversations around the level of ambition, the degree of achievability of the 2030 targets, what would be reasonable, what is achievable, what will society accept, what would society like, etc., and a degree of alignment on other strategic goals and targets, things like economic development plans, industrial development, and so on. And as you can see, the last point related to data access issues, information gaps, extremely important at the provincial and local levels. These things are really, really a major obstacle to developing disaster resilience plans, but also energy efficiency. It's really holding things back. I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasm there for improving energy efficiency. I've absolutely no doubt about that. But access to information and data is really an issue. It's a big issue. What did we agree? This is just briefly the energy efficiency target that we've set. I'll go into the detail about the methodology behind it, but probably for time reasons, better not to. 26% improvement in energy efficiency in the period from 2020 to 2030, that was agreed, and a few of the main points related to disaster resilience there as well. The main impacts and achievements of the MSD, first and foremost, I would say we managed to develop a real understanding, and all of the stakeholders from government to societal actors to private sector organizations, energy companies, utilities, to smaller actors as well, investors, local business developers, etc., a deep understanding about energy efficiency potential and benefits and how that relates to disaster resilience. We got the endorsement of targets that they have absolute ownership over, enthusiasm behind them as well. There's momentum that was building in terms of what are the next steps. So the vision's in place, the target was endorsed. What's next? Put in place a framework, legal measures and so on, regulation. Also, like I say, strengthened relationships and links between stakeholders and the institutions. Also as well, an interesting point was within government as well. We noticed that within the conversations we had over these 6 days, government departments starting to see exactly information that is in other parts of government or skills that are there, local knowledge and so on, which they weren't aware of. So it was a useful exercise in that sense. And just lastly, last 15 seconds, and the lessons learned from the MSD. Okay, framing discussions around disaster resilience can be really helpful for energy efficiency. There's a huge scope for rolling this kind of process out, MSDs, at provincial and local levels in other Asian contexts. There's a massive benefit available from it. So yeah, I better leave it there for now. Thanks for your attention.
I really like the combination of these two presentations because I think Nidhi gave sort of the decarbonization roadmap, and then Craig went into picking one specific action and what all that is involved in setting those discussions. And it's not everything straightforward. These things take time and a lot of dialogue. And I think more and more what we're seeing here at ADB as well, we're trying to link energy efficiency with other elements, and safety, climate resilience is definitely one. And it definitely, in some countries like Indonesia, Philippines, it does get safety and disaster resilience gets more traction than energy efficiency. So good to have them both together. So our fifth presenter is Noel Verdote, lead deployment of advanced energy sources and systems at Energy Secure. He's an active champion on energy efficiency with local governments, and he'll share his work with the city of Dumaguete in the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you, David. On behalf of USAID Energy Secure Philippines, I'd like to thank ADB and its partners for this opportunity. I'll be doing a deep dive on one specific city, as was mentioned by David. But to start with, I'd like to set the context. We are a 5-year, $34 million project funded by USAID. We're now into our 4th year, and we have 3 major objectives. Our goal is to contribute to some 500 megawatt of clean energy generating capacity and deploying some $750 million. But to date, I'm happy to say that we've more than exceeded those targets, the generating capacity by tenfold and the mobilized private sector investment by 8-fold. Now, the specific project that I'm going to present cuts across these three objectives, but basically focusing on objective number 2 in support of the local energy efficiency and conservation law under the grants cross-cutting activity. Dumaguete City is south of the Philippines. It's a vibrant city called City of Gentle People with influx of tourists, both private, both foreign and local tourists because of the scenic spots, the harbor promenade, and it's a gateway to the various tourist attractions in Negros Oriental, that's south of Manila. It's also a university city because the more prominent universities and colleges are located in the city. So there's an influx of students coming from the adjoining regions and locations. And all of this combined carries a burden to the city on its carrying capacity. So the aspiration of the city is to be a net zero economy by 2050. And this is where our partner came in. We work with them in doing these activities. So there was a multi-level policy integration and analysis made, doing literature review and getting the best practices similar to what we're doing here in the Philippines, specifically for applicable to Dumaguete City. And this was also run through the various stakeholders, and the result was a policy blueprint. This is based on 4 pillars, but some policy recommendations to a tune of 15 were made. The second, which is the core activity, is the energy transition roadmap, where among the things that we've done is to conduct investment-grade energy audit. Unlike what the government is espousing, only level 1 energy audit, this one is investment-grade, where we identified specific opportunities, the energy performance of the buildings of the City Hall, and coming up with solutions matrix, and then the energy transition roadmap. This is up for publication. I won't belabor you with the very small details in this, but in the short term, the objective is for the city to comply to existing policies and regulations going up to 2030, which is 2050, which is the ultimate goal of the city to be net zero. This talks about the opportunities in 4 different sectors. We have the energy, buildings, transportation, and waste. Onto the transportation, I'd like to highlight that there's no taxi in Dumaguete. It's mostly tricycles, similar to the tuk-tuk and bajai, which are very intensive in the use of diesel fuel. Now, on the energy transition roadmap, we established a baseline, and there was, aside from the energy audit, the virtual modeling was also made, simulation and validated. And there was this energy monitoring system installed for the city executives and decision makers to have a full appreciation of where, how, and when energy is used. And we tried to work for an ESCO transaction model, but while initially the city government officials are interested, there was this change in interest towards election next year. And because of the results of the investment grade audit and the simulation, as well as the results of the energy monitoring system installed, they were convinced. And now they are actually replacing the old air conditioners with inverter units. Almost all the lighting systems there are already LEDs. So this is how the picture looks like in terms of energy consumption. The bulk is by cooling, followed by some equipment, lighting, and others. So the base consumption is to the tune of 378 megawatt hour. But with these interventions, starting with the air conditioning units, switching to more efficient ones, inverters, among others, and also addressing the supply side with rooftop solar PV, the reduction translates to more than half of the consumption. So some key takeaways, okay? As I mentioned earlier, because of the investment grade audit plus the real-time monitoring of the energy performance of the facilities and the specific equipment, the city government officials are now implementing it using their own funds. They're still interested to look into the ESCO model transaction, but they're now doing it on their own. Including the new buildings that are coming up, the new offices are now fitted with inverter air cons. We also did the education of the workforce, including those in including the service contractors, the janitors, and the maintenance people, because it's very important that the whole workforce be involved in this undertaking. It's not only the planning people or the energy efficiency and conservation officers. And it goes to show that with this small step, the city is now on its way to not only doing this for compliance because there's a law, but this is towards the realization of their goal to be a smart and livable city by 2050. I'd like to add one more thing. I remembered, I have five seconds. The South African philosophy of Ubuntu is very important. Aside from building the entrepreneurial spirit, we have to have that I am because we are. It's everybody's business. With that, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you so much, Noel, and great to see an example of specific city and the work you've been doing. Now we need to replicate these in many more, but it's great to see the potential savings, quite substantial, combining energy efficiency and renewable energy. Our sixth presenter is Stania Puspapavardhani, Energy Transition Manager, Center of Reform on Economics in Indonesia, CORE for short. And she's going to bring us back to electric mobility and looking at transformation that's happening very rapidly in Indonesia that's being driven by policies and incentives. So Stania, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And today I'm going to present about the state of Indonesia electric vehicle progress. And we're looking about the Indonesia electric vehicle policy. First, why is it important to study EV in Indonesia? Because it becomes increasingly adaptive to Indonesian market, and especially because the role of a government that puts a strategic priority to Indonesia electric vehicle industry in the future, and also its supply chain, right from the nickel reserve, where Indonesia has one of the largest nickel reserve, to one of the midstreaming industry, which is the battery industry. So in here we see the roadmap that Indonesian government has put from the battery cell productions to battery material, where we plan the H-pulse melter, and then also the cobalt and sulfate battery and cathode and anode materials, right into the four-wheel vehicle domestic component level, right? Until we have a minimum 80% component in 2031. Currently, we have foreign investors, mostly Wuling and Hyundai. Public passenger vehicle, we have it in a plan for completely built up and completely knocked down and part by part until 2031. So we see the Indonesia EV policy where the Indonesian government has put first in 2019, the president put the presidential regulations that cover all of the regulations down it. And then the ecosystem support put by the Minister for Energy and Mineral Resources regulations on the provision for the infrastructure of charging stations and the adoption of government vehicles where it's used for government officials. It is put in 2022 where our organizations looking at it in closer and then assisting in how the provincial government allocate the budget on it. Here we see also the regulations on the guidelines for conversion of program for motorbikes. Similar with Alvin's presentation on the first side, our motorcycles adoptions in electric vehicles is growing progress further faster than the cars. And the sub-national level, at the present, only Bali has the local government that support battery electric vehicle. We don't have it in Jakarta. It's put into general transportation regulations, but Bali has already launched a regional action plan for the acceleration of battery electric vehicle, despite its quite a relatively small areas of the province and the shorter roads. The incentive that we put until 2024 is 10 incentives so far, which include tax holiday that reduce income tax for company investing on EV, mini tax holiday, tax allowance, capital investment incentive, electric motorbike incentive where people can buy with $429 discount, a luxury tax incentive where the unit can get 0% discount, import duty cut incentive, luxury tax cut incentive, VAT incentive, and then vehicle tax and vehicle transfer fee incentive. I think we need to touch down all of those incentives. It's actually making an impact in reducing the price of the electric vehicle, both in cars and also in motorbikes. In here we see the study by IAESR, our dialogue partner, Institute of Essential Service Reform, where they have calculated all of those incentives also added with the capex and tax and the fuel cost and also the maintenance, still the price of electric vehicle, both in cars and in motorbikes, is lower than the ICE. This is the growth projection that we're looking at. The green one is the target set by the government, but the yellow one is the one that we calculated at Core Indonesia. We think that looking at the 2022 sales of electric vehicles, both in two-wheel and four-wheel vehicles, the target set by the government is too high. So we calculated it and it probably going to be around half of the target itself. Some of the regulatory challenges and the potential solutions. Indonesia has uneven availability of charging infrastructure, persists in many regions across Indonesia, although Indonesia has oversupply of electric power since 2012 and possibly going to resume until 2028 and 2030. And then the price of battery electric vehicle, especially in cars or four-wheel, remains relatively higher compared to conventional fuel power vehicles. The setting may be different for motorcycles. And then the supporting infrastructure for BAV component is still limited, especially in most regions across Indonesia, where the infrastructure such as basic roads and electricity quality is not yet easy to be found. while we talk about electric vehicle in commercial motorcycle and cars, we also remember one of the points made by director of Transjakarta, where he attend our seminars, that if we support electric vehicle commercial units, we probably have a cleaner emission, but it may create a green congestion. So everyone is going to go on the street, but it's going to be congested still. So what we support also is actually the electrification of public bus transportation. And then the most progressive one happened in Jakarta, where in 2023, they started to piloting with 100 single bus EV, and moving to 2024-25 until 2030 with 100% electric vehicle. So these are some of the barriers to EV adoption in Indonesia, and how this is probably more than the policy, but how the readiness of the Indonesian market, the culture itself. One of the survey found that the first obstacles for electric vehicle adoption in Indonesia is the difficulty to finding public charging stations. The second is the expensive price. The third is the limited driving distance, because most of Indonesian landscape mountainous and then have a different level of distance. Fourth is the difficult battery replacement. Fifth is the performance and safety. And seven is the favoritism, lack of models and choice. Thank you. This is our team of researchers that have done our year-long research on EV. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stan. It's amazing the journey that Indonesia is going on, and having been in People's Republic of China and Vietnam, I can see Indonesia is on a similar trajectory. And I was recently there in Jakarta. I was very impressed. Already a lot of electric vehicles, and so it's amazing the transformation, but also the challenges. Probably a lot for us to do there, ADB, to ensure that, particularly on the EV charging. I think that's an important area as well. With that, last but not least, we have Shivangi Dingra, Program Coordinator or Transport for the Climate Group, also looking at the opportunities to decarbonize transport sector in cities through energy efficiency measures. So, Shivangi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, for the introduction. I am representing Climate Group's work, and particularly their transport work in India. And I'm happy to do that and be part of the panel talking about decarbonization from the private sector perspective. So Climate Group is this organization, which is a international non-profit, and we are working with one mission, which is to drive climate action fast. We are working with businesses and governments, and for businesses, we have demand-side driven commitment campaigns, and we have these across systems, as we call them, and renewable energy. For renewable energy, we have RE100. For transport system, we have EV100 and EV100 Plus, which are campaigns for, I'll come to those campaigns in my upcoming slides. Then for the industry system, we have the Steel Zero campaign and Concrete Zero campaigns. And with government and policy, we have a coalition of subnational governments across the world called the Under 2 Coalition. And we also engage subnational governments on ZEV transitions. We also have the Climate Week NYC, where we bring together stakeholders from across the board working towards climate change, climate action. Particularly about the transport-specific, system-specific campaigns, EV100 and EV100 Plus are global campaigns which are garnering commitments from companies and businesses which are demand-side companies to electric vehicles, or they own fleets up to 7.5 tons or above, up to 7.5 tons in case of the EV100 campaign and above in case of the EV100 plus campaigns. We have set targets for them to transition to electric vehicles by 2030 in case of EV100 and 2040 in case of EV100 plus. I'll quickly jump into our work and talk about why we need to talk about transitioning the freight transportation sector. So if we look at just globally as well as in India, the numbers of fleet on road and equivalent vehicle miles driven, the goods vehicles are will form very small part of this, and as opposed to passenger vehicles, whether it is in the urban areas or beyond. And on the other hand, if we look at the emissions they produce, these are disproportionately higher. And especially in India, 90% of road freight transport in terms of vehicle kilometers, they all use diesel as their fuel. These are ICE engine vehicles. And India is also the third largest automotive market in terms of sales. So this becomes an important area to address. And particularly talking about the MHDV sector or the medium and heavy duty vehicles, this proportion is to the extent that 45% of on-road transport emissions are from the MHDV sector, and only 2% of the vehicles on India's roads are MHDVs. This is expected to increase by, it's expected to increase by double in 2040. And that's why electrification as a momentum by policy also in India becomes a very important very next step. Why are we looking at transporters with respect to the value chain? It's because transporters are the ones implementing this exercise. The 45% as we're talking about emissions to reduce in road transport, they will be the ones that will be implementing this and will benefit or not benefit from it in terms of economy, in terms of long-term plans, and they are also stakeholders directly connected with the shipper as well as the customer. So they become a very important stakeholder here. So we have been trying to create very sectoral specific decarbonization efforts at CG. And I can start with the last mile delivery electrification project that we have at under this EV100 campaign, which is for vehicles 7.5 tons or below. And under this project, we are advocating and bringing together different stakeholders via demand side and supply side conversations. We are promoting knowledge sharing. We are also looking to create a network of subnational governments under this project within India. And we also create industry voice for policy to hear. Why electrification of specifically last mile deliveries? Because in the urban areas, this becomes a very relevant sector, and the urban duty cycles can be improved and emissions can be seen improving in direct terms, including air pollution. India's conundrum of air pollution is well known to the world, and significant fuel cost reductions are also observed. We are working with a network of organizations called the Sustainable Mobility Network on this project to highlight to highlight CG's particular role in this network. Our EV100 demand side has been very crucial in creating signaling for the demand side, last mile delivery electrification. There are some 390K plus Indian corporate fleet commitments. These many vehicles have been committed under this project. And this is as per a report recently released by the Climate Group, which is one of the reports we produce upon gathering reporting on electrifying and transitioning from companies. This report is called Charging the EV Transition, and you can have a look at it on our website. Also, according to it, the vehicles deployed are also 19K plus, and 18K, close to 18K of these are delivery vehicles. So, and if we look at the top 10 companies who have committed fleet transition, of those, the top two companies are actually from India and delivery companies. We also see that the larger chunk of committed vehicles and even transitioned vehicles is 2 and 3 wheelers, again reflecting the last mile delivery transition. Specifically, impact on policy in local areas. We can, again, Delhi is the best example to talk about because it is facing its air pollution challenge, but also transport is the single biggest sector that accounts for emissions from, within Delhi. And Delhi also has a last mile delivery plus passenger vehicle fleet that accounts for 43% of the total road transport emissions. It can be seen that commitments such as the EV 100 commitment has created demand aggregated within this regional area. And this has helped create a policy push. And for one example of this would be the Vehicle Aggregator and Delivery Service Partner scheme, which was recently released by the Delhi government, and which sets targets, very strict targets. This has started in the past with the Delhi EV policy, where there were mentions of electric fleet delivery transition. And now there is a strict scheme that sets targets for the next 5 years. We have also done the exercise of identifying sectoral applications in trucking sector, and for that, we have a report you can have a look at called the Early Market Outlook Report, which looks at the Indian market in trucking specifically. We have found that out of the broadly 13 categories of applications, parcel load or FMCG is the largest on-road fleet truck fleet share, and these are followed by perishable goods, etc. I'll just quickly skip through this. This is a use case versus segment in terms of medium or heavy duty. And how we did the exercise of narrowing down on which sectors to focus on within the trucking sector. We looked at indicative techno-commercial feasibility and highest CO2 emissions impact, and looking at also corporate influence, which companies will have influence making other corporates also to transition. For this, we have done duty cycle data collection exercise, and the results we have generated are in terms of, this is a results for a particular company in the minerals sector. We have results on charging requirements, regeneration properties of the electric truck in terms of geography that it operates on, the emission reductions it will create, and also TCO, which refers to the what of a business case is it for them to transition to electric trucks? Because if we are working with businesses, they are not going to compromise on their TCO. Lastly, we are doing electric truck pilot projects with these companies, and at the moment we are at the stage of designing this pilot with our techno-commercial feasibility results. We have also worked with subnational governments on local policy, and I think I have exceeded my time, so I will talk about this in the panel discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Shivanji, to take us through the work you're doing and actually engaging on an important topic, which is working closely with the private sector and working with the large fleets and getting them to transform. And I was just discussing with Wona about that's definitely an area of opportunity for our private sector, whether it's postal offices or other. And so with that, we have very short time period. And I think what I'll do is I'll invite all the panelists to come up just now. And what we might do is get you all involved, and we can actually move straight into questions from the audience. I do have some specific questions that I'll try to weave in as well, but I'd like to get some engagement from all of you and maximize as well the time for questions. So any first questions anybody would like to ask? There's a microphone at the back, so you just need to go to the microphone and just let us know your name and affiliation, and just be very succinct with your question. If not, I can start. I've got some questions, so no issue if anybody's feeling shy. So with that, maybe I'll start with Alvin. So we saw a lot of the data and the information that you've collected. What, in your view, are the priority policies for energy efficiency in the transport sector in the region? What should we be focusing in the next? We've got a very short gap till 2030, so to do a lot. So what would you suggest? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for the question. I think at this stage, even though we have, let's say, a short window to make, let's say, significant impacts, I think it's still a matter of balancing the short-term, medium-term, long-term strategies, looking at the avoid, shift, improve framework. So building cities that, let's say, avoid unnecessary travel, walkable cities, shifting travel towards more efficient modes, so public transport enabled cities, and improving our fleets and fuels. So having cleaner fleets, having cleaner fuels, electrification. But I think it's also important to have, let's say, mechanisms that would enable vertical integration, enabling really the different stakeholders at the different levels. So especially at the local governments, wherein we also have the need to enable the cooperation at the local level with other sectors, such as the private sector, academia, civil society. And so this is the time that we have to look into a multi-dimensional sort of cooperation. The integration of the transport sector with the energy sector, especially also with infrastructure, digital communications, as well as waste sectors right now, very much important, particularly if we are transitioning towards, let's say, more electrified cities. And I think this is also very important to mention the need to integrate the subsystems, so the passenger and freight urban transportation sectors as well. So thank you.
I'm so glad you mentioned one of my favorite sort of policies, which is avoid, shift, and improve. So, of course, a lot of you noticed the presentation. We focused particularly on the mobility side, on the EV, but of course, a great priority is to avoid the need for transporters shifting and improving it, improving being the energy efficiency element. One now to you, I think. We were chatting a bit earlier about that we've almost financed all the modes of e-transport so far. And because we have a lot of government stakeholders with you, I think very succinctly a couple of questions. So, what are the opportunities that you're seeing at the moment? And as you said, you have to be on this journey with the private sector, with the client, because it's all new and new technologies. But also, so in building on that, the opportunities. But what do you see that governments need to do? What are the challenges you're finding that the governments need to address so that there's greater private sector investment? And that's been a sort of a key theme for ASEF this year. How do we move from the billions to trillions of dollars? Thank you.
Yep, no, thank you, David. I mean, yes, we have done a number of e-mobility, different modes of e-mobility, but there's still lots to do. So the key areas that we are focusing and we are in the development of financing is, one is charging station network. So that is the critical infrastructure that is missing. And unlike other developed markets where the government is providing subsidies to support the rollout, in this part of the world, private sector is mostly responsible for that, and that leads to the slower scale and speed of the rollout of those networks. So that is the first one that we are trying to support on the private sector side. The second one is, as was touched upon, was medium and heavy duty trucks. So the total cost of ownership on this modality is coming down, and it's becoming more, it makes sense for the private sector to take them on. So we are looking at some private sector companies really trying to bring those heavy-duty electric trucks into the commercial industrial operations and logistics and so on. So we're looking at providing support in that sector at the moment. Finally, I think on the consumer front, the two-wheelers are critical. I mean, 60 to 90% of vehicles on the road in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand are two-wheelers. And the TCOs, the total cost of ownership for two-wheelers, has come down, and it is now attractive enough for consumers to take on. So it is at a tipping point of mass adoption. And this is something that we're actually working, especially in the places like Indonesia and Vietnam. So yeah, I think those are the three areas. I mean, in terms of policy, I'll just be very quick. Charging stations, that's what you need to support, because the business model on the charging station is not something the private sector can take on, especially during early adoption phases, because the utilization rate is very, very low. It will be loss-making for many years. And that's where we need the government money to come in and roll out the initial network. So that's the only one. If I can leave one with that, I think that's the support that we need from the government. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very fortunate to have also an ADB colleague here working at the urban sector. And so maybe I'll let you introduce yourself and your question, and maybe you can also share some of the work you've been doing in the urban sector.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. My name is Jingming Huang. I'm the director of Water and Urban Development Sector Group. My team covers Central, West, and East Asian countries. I'm very happy to hear from your presentations, mainly focusing on their energy efficiency in the transport and also the cities. And then I do see their big progress has been made in transportation, specifically their heavy-duty trucks and all that, moving to e-vehicles and more energy efficiency approach. My questions are, in fact, mainly two questions. First, in many of our ADB member countries, a lot of energy, in fact, is for the cooling system, because you can see all the countries in Southeast Asian area, in South Asia, also in China. And specifically, I do see the presentation from our presenter from Thematic that 2/3 of the energy consumption in Thematic is for cooling system. And we do see that the heat wave becomes more and more common due to the climate change. So, we would expect an increase of energy consumption in the cooling system due to this increased heat wave phenomenon. My questions comes, okay, first, how you would see we manage this increasing energy demand in cooling, and how we really offset this energy consumption in cooling, because it's rather difficult to shift it to other energy resource. That's the first. And then second, we do see all the cities are moving to the carbon neutral. And my question comes, we set the carbon neutral target. Do you think we have reached the peak of the carbon emission for your cities or your country already? Of course, we would consider we reach the peak before we come to the carbon neutral, yeah? So the two questions. First is your thoughts on the increasing energy consumption for the cooling system. Second is the peak of carbon emission and carbon neutral. What your thoughts on their roadmap? Thank you.
Thank you, Jingming. We did have a session earlier on heating and cooling, so I think that was quite addressed. But I'll ask maybe Nidhi and Craig to touch upon it, because I think that was part of the energy efficiency targets, and maybe Noel as well, and then on the carbon neutrality. But maybe very briefly, so we can cover some other questions. Thank you, Nidhi and Craig and Noel, I think.
So, yeah, I mean, even in our work, right? I mean, cooling is a major component of this, and it's going to grow. So, I mean, if we continue with the business as usual trajectory, we saw one of the things that came out is the residential component, and addressing residential cooling is one of the major thing. And if we grow in the way that we are growing, we are just, I don't know what the peak will be. The peak will keep shifting up, and we'll keep adjusting. And that is something that we need to be, you know, the frog in the pot kind of a situation. When do you actually pull that frog out? I mean, should we just keep warming up? So that's definitely a concern. And that's one thing that came out even in our actions. Like, while we look at residential cooling systems, we also need to look at urban solutions in terms of cool roofs and other parts of it. So when we look at a city or we look at municipalities, are there examples where they've done green roofing? Have they done cool roofing as also an urban strategy when we're addressing cooling? Maybe I'll pause for that and let him touch the other bits as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. We'll just say, I think on the cooling side, it's definitely something that's not being ignored, you know, in terms of energy transition planning. It's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the planning side of things, and the public policy is starting to come through and reflect that. There's no doubt as well that demand for cooling services will increase. There's no doubt about that at all. I would maybe pick up a bit on if we've reached peak emissions, and that's a very good question. And I mean, I'm sort of slightly sticking my neck out here. I don't have a definitive answer, and you know, obviously the answer is I hope so. There are some indications that at the global level, you know, emissions are starting to slow down a little bit. We've had a long period, obviously, where things have been growing despite best efforts, you know, and that's quite discouraging as well. But I'm talking specifically in the last 12 months or so, it looks like there might be some positive signs that we might be sort of peaking in terms of emissions. If I would talk very briefly about the case in North Sulawesi province and Indonesia in general, emissions are set to continue growing. You know, the economy is growing extremely well in that country in particular, in that region in particular. Demand for energy is growing massively as well, and it will take time to break off from coal, to break that stranglehold of coal. So emissions will continue to grow definitely in certain places, and yeah, it's the job of policymakers to try to find solutions that can deal with that reality and also force the energy transition as much as possible through energy efficiency. There's a huge number of opportunities there, and also to make the transition towards low carbon energy systems, and you know, that process is underway. So I hope in general terms we're reaching peak emissions, but yeah, it's a very good question.
Thank you, Craig. Noel, do you want to share your, not only with Dumaguete, but other cities you've been working? I think that's worth it.
Thank you, David. We discussed this with David earlier about his project on hospitals. I think for those which has greater opportunity for cooling, just like the 24/7 establishments, we can do both passive and active cooling where it is applicable. Okay, a case in point, for example, I mentioned about this in one of my conversations with one of our colleagues here. The Mall of Asia, for example, the way they designed it, the commercial building in a UP Town Center using both active and passive cooling. So more green spaces, more unlike the conventional design of commercial buildings which are blocked with one central air conditioning system. The other one is based on my previous work. We did district cooling. So we free up the capacities that would have otherwise been used for backup instead of, for example, 4 buildings having one, each building having one centralized cooling system. We have one plant. Then the freed up space can be rented out. There's no redundancy, not much redundancy needed. So that's another opportunity that can be resorted to. But again, there has to be policy in place that supports this. Even the tariff should be also made applicable to encourage more use of district cooling. Also the ice, how do you call that? Cold storage storage system. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. And maybe Jingming, there's, I think EDS has been working on national cooling action plans, and there's colleagues also from CLASP, I think here, so they can share with you later some of their work on that. So I'll jump now to Stania and ask her more about what, in her view, has been, you know, the impact of policy on EV uptake. I think you covered it a bit, but then more particularly, how are you looking at what Shivangji was mentioning in terms of the light commercial vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles? What is Indonesia doing for that specific track of, and what policy should be considered to improve the efficiency of commercial and heavy-duty vehicles?
Yeah, in the context of Indonesia, the light and commercial duty vehicles, the government already put it in a roadmap on the Ministry of Industry regulations, and in some part of the area, government prioritizing it to support for touristic destinations where it also use lightweight and duty heavy vehicles. But most massive one is done in the city level where it's depending on the governor and the city government to employ the light and duty vehicles for the official utilization.
Thank you. Shivangji, the question I have is, what have been the achievements and lessons learned as well for on your journey? I think you highlighted particularly Delhi, but what areas should also local governments prioritize, and that can help the work you're doing to decarbonize the transport sector, and based on your experience? Thank you.
Sure, thanks, David. You've mentioned Delhi. So I think I mentioned about the Delhi aggregator policy, vehicle aggregator policy. I think that is one piece of work that we look at as a big success because it is because of companies that are delivering to such a dense urban agglomeration, using delivery fleet in such a dense urban agglomeration, that such a demand for electric vehicles has been created regionally. It is these vehicles, noticing this, such a policy was needed. It was increasing the emissions in a particular region to a great extent. The Delhi government has recognized that and taken up a policy that sets very strict targets to transition to electric vehicles in this sector. Apart from that, from the MHDV sector, we are also looking to work with the Delhi government to look at the e-commerce. As we said, the greatest number of trucks on Indian roads is parcel load carrying trucks. So e-commerce sector again would be a great opportunity for the Delhi region. And with our in the past, we have done techno-commercial feasibility analyses with companies, and we have found that not just from movement within Delhi, movement to and from Delhi is also caused concerns for these companies, and there is apprehension to transitioning because of these. And this would include entry at highways. This would include there is also, Delhi also is the national capital, so any stakeholder consultation we hold in the city leads to not just local policy action, but also national policy action. So one thing we hear often is that the central motor vehicle rules. This is something we hear from the transporters a lot. This is one rule that is implemented by the center but needs to be taken up by states. So this is something we hear the transporters, they want it moving, going ahead. So anything that the transporter can say for the city, probably policy will take it up eventually. So that's the idea that we take up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, so please just introduce yourself, affiliation, and just keep it short in case there's any more questions. Is there any more questions? Okay, another question here. So just
Hello.
be very short. If you want to go as well, we'll take the two in one go. Thank you.
My name is Shivam from Environmental Design Solutions India. So I have a question, just a small question to all the panelists, that a lot of discussion is going on the e-vehicle. But just like we are, adopting e-vehicles at a larger scale from nowadays, and we are going to scale it up. So what is the progress on the standard and labelings of the e-vehicles? Because at the end of the day, energy efficiency of the e-vehicle is also going to matter. So I want to know from the esteemed panelists that what is the progress on worldwide scale?
Okay, so I'll ask Alvin to respond to that, but maybe the next question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shiva.
Sorry. Okay, take one more question and then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, dear panelists. I'm Omar Zereteli. I represent the Ministry of Economy of Georgia, and so it's a privilege being here today. Even yesterday, we had a talk about the energy efficiency, renewable energy technology. I was just asking, in Georgia, we have some targets by 2030 in terms of the energy efficiency and renewable energy, for instance. However, I can't remember if there is some indication about the enhancing of the energy efficiency in the transport, but we have the target of the strengthening of the share of renewable energy of the transport by 2030, and I think they look like each other, because if we are strengthening the role of the renewable energy in the transport, of course you are supporting also the enhancing of the energy efficiency component in transport. So in this direction, for instance, we are implementing some reforms, and I will not waste much of your time. However, I wanted to ask, so if you also consider, then maybe that's not the subject of today's session, but still I have to ask, so is there any policy, for instance, to develop some green hydrogen in transport sector, for instance, because we have been requested by the directive, for instance, if we wanted to enhance the component of the renewable energy in transport, the green hydrogen was one of the alternatives. So I wanted to ask if there is any practical steps in this direction also based on your country experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll direct the first one to Alvin on the fuel economy standards, and then I'll ask maybe Nidhi, can you share the work India has been doing on the railways and how they've got a target to procure 100% renewable energy for the biggest railway in the world. So that's a massive and ambitious plan, which they are achieving, of course, and doing that combined with energy efficiency. So maybe Alvin first, and then Nidhi just very shortly. So
yeah. Thank you very much. I think for the first one, we just probably 2 points. First one is let's say the transition in terms of the global recognition towards looking at fuel economy and towards energy economy. For example, the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, which has been working towards looking at baselines for vehicle fleet fuel economies. Traditionally, I've been looking into ICE vehicles. Now, they have shifted also into integrating electric vehicles. There have been some progress. For example, I think it was India who recently also had a specific integration of the electric vehicles. I think something is also happening in terms of the South Korean standards, for example. A lot of these big economies are doing let's say, the corporate average fuel economy standards. The smaller countries are more focusing towards the provision of more informational sorts of policies, for example, coming up with energy economy portals wherein this would essentially feed more information into consumers, not necessarily as strong as standards, looking at the fleets, but considering also the resources and the structure where they are at in terms of the automotive industry. There are these sorts of complementary sorts of policies that are being adopted as well. So thank you.
Yeah, so in India, I mean, with Indian Railways, that's actually 2% of 3%. 3% of the overall energy of India. It's a huge corporation, all railways. They have set a target of 2030 carbon neutral. And this is, India otherwise is 270. So there are transportation heavy sectors which are looking at more stringent targets, and it's looking at both traction and non-traction. So specifically in the non-traction sector, they're looking at net zero emissions with their buildings, because they have it's a mammoth organization in itself. With the traction side of it also, along with electrification, there is round-the-clock purchase of renewable energy as well. So that's getting integrated as a part of it. And also looking at carbon neutrality in terms of sequestration and other options which can be dealt with beyond just doing that. So,
yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks so much. Unfortunately, we have to break, but thanks so much for your attention and for your active participation. Please join me in thanking the panelists today for their great presentation. And so that concludes our session for today. I think there's a lot we can do with the governments, but I'll let you now go to network and have a great lunch. Thank you so much.